to RotoGrinders Today. I'm Jordan Cooper, a.k.a. BlenderHD, if you want to follow me on Twitter. And it's Friday, May 10th. We'll be taking a look at UFC Fight Night, St. Louis, happening tomorrow night. Derek Lewis versus Rodrigo Nascimento in the main event. Hit that thumbs up button on your way in the door. You know how much I like the thummy thumbs. Hit that like button. Hit the subscribe button if you're new here. Hit the notification bell to know when we go live. If you want to take care of MLB today, we got Grinders live later today, 5 o'clock Eastern, followed by Crunch Time. You'll get the weather updates. You'll get all the plays, the picks, all the analysis for today's MLB slate. But tomorrow we got UFC, and it's Friday, so I bring in John Breslin, a.k.a. SquirrelPatrol, the author of the Takedowns article. If you're a premium member here, and we're running a deal right now. If you want 6 months of combo premium here at RotoGrinders, $250 off. I don't know why they're doing it. It's too much money off. Or if you want to try it out for a month, we'll give you $40 off your first month. Or if you want to try it out for 3 days, $19.99. You get Lineup HQ, you get Sim Labs, all of our tools, all of our data, all of our premium content for all the sports except for NASCAR. NASCAR is kind of a la carte. So if you want to listen to the Ground and Pound podcast, Liam and Mike broke down all the fights. That is up now on the site. So feel free to listen to that. You can see it right here. You can listen to that after this show. But John, I said on yesterday's show that I liked this slate, this UFC slate. Because to me, it's because first off, we got 13 fights. I mean, anytime we get 13 plus fights, a little bit less duplication. And I think that there are like the spreads of the fights for the most part are quite tight, which means a lot more combinations, a lot more underdog possibility winners. And it's also like there are some like really clear fights to target and some really clear fights not to target.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I've been looking forward to this conversation all week. Looking at the card, it's always interesting when we get a heavyweight main event, and like Derek Lewis, main event in particular, because a lot of times we have one of those cards where it's like, well, you kind of have to take your side on the main event, and then go and then pick the other 5 fighters or whatever. But this one, I don't think it's going to be a main event you have to have. But it might end up being a main event that's very, very nice to have, right? Like if Derek Lewis gets a first round knockout, you're going to want Derek Lewis at 8,400, or and if Nascimento gets a bunch of takedowns and he gets a first round win or second round win, then he's a fighter you probably want to have at 7,800. But they're not fighters you need to have necessarily. It's not like a fight that's going to go like Pantoja last week and score 145 points. There was by the way, like a big win for our simulations, I think, in last week's card. I'm not sure if you saw, like Michel Pereira he got the quick win bonus at 9,600, and our simulations were kind of down on him more so than I expected. But he got that quick win bonus at 9,600 and did not land on the winning lineup on either like the large field contest or even like the 555 on DraftKings, which is a much smaller contest. Even though he was the second highest scorer on the card, getting the quick win bonus.
Well, that was primarily because all the other 9K fighters were also getting 100-plus scores, and we only had one underdog win on the entire card. Yeah. And that's how those situations kind of happen. But this main event, Derek Lewis, Rodrigo Nascimento, 8,400, 7,800. I'm putting in quotes. It is a 5-round fight. I mean, it's also heavyweight. I view this fight very simply. It's a mid-range fight. So this is a little bit different than if it was like a $9,000, $7,200 fight. I think if there's a first-round finish, it's very likely that either fighter is going to be optimal at those prices. Because the first-round finish is typically going to be over 100, especially with these guys, right? We have a card with very minimal wrestling, right? It's a lot of strikers and knockout artists and high variance situations like that. So like a lot of decision wins tomorrow probably don't make optimal lineups unless like it's one of those only one underdog wins and you get an 80-point score, and that's the only way that you could do it. This main event, I mean, Derek Lewis, I mean, the volume of this main event is probably low enough that, like, just the striking totals, if it goes 25 minutes, may be less than some of the 3-round fights that are on this card. So the value of it being like a 5-round decision win by Nascimento striking may still only be like 78 points. I mean, like the winner may barely score over 80 in a decision. Because these guys I mean, Derek Lewis throws like 5 strikes a round. I mean, like, but I mean, they're power punches, and hopefully knocks you out. And Nascimento, obviously, the clearest path to victory for Nascimento would be to wrestle, but he really doesn't even wrestle. I mean, like he has more wrestling ability than Derek Lewis, but in the UFC, he hasn't wrestled. I mean, when you don't even attempt takedowns, I mean, it's hard for me to say that, like, you're gonna do the smart thing. It's not like he's a great wrestler anyway, but at heavyweight against Derek Lewis, I mean, Derek Lewis owns the record for most knockouts in UFC history. That would be the best way to go. I'm not sure how the field is going to react. Currently, we have 52% Derek Lewis, 23% Nascimento. I think those numbers are going to get a little bit closer. But because Derek Lewis has a minus 145 inside the distance line, plus 200 in the first round. So we looked at that scenario. I know you do this in the takedowns article. If we assume, even with the VIG, let's just call plus 233%. If Derek Lewis gets a first round knockout at 8,400, I want Derek Lewis. Like, Derek Lewis, his optimal rate, I'm assuming when our sim tool comes out, Derek Lewis is going to be pretty damn high on the list. But it's you got 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, it's one of those, like, there's no way that Derek Lewis wins a volume-based decision and scores 100 points. Or a third-round knockout won't even give you that. Second-round knockout may not even give you that. So, if he's legitimately going to be over 40% owned, it's hard for me to be. I'll probably be under on this main event because, I mean, I don't mind I mean, you have to hold your sphincter in for 5 minutes. But I mean, I don't know. It feels like you're feeling the same way, that you'll have this fight in a lot of your lineups, but still probably under the field.
Yeah, I think we're thinking about it the exact same way. I don't think Derek Lewis is going to be 52% owned. But I think he'll be one of the higher owned fighters on the card. There is a clear percentage you should own Derek Lewis, and it is that 33% that you mentioned, and it comes down exactly to this 200 odds of getting the first round win. I was looking at some numbers from the expert survey to put in some key stats or whatever. That, like, Derek Lewis in his last 29 minutes, his last 3 losses, he's fought 29 minutes. 25 of those minutes came in the Jailton Almeida fight, which, like, very improbably went the distance. In those 29 minutes of, like, losing fighting, he's scored 12 DraftKings points combined, including an absolute 0 against Sergey Spivak, which was another fight that I watched. I'm like, oh my god, he's not doing anything. And that fight went 3 minutes. Like, he lasted 3 minutes in the fight without scoring a point, without landing a strike or a significant strike or anything. Even like rolling around, couldn't even get like a second of control time. He was just like pinned, and Spivak won. In his like 33 seconds, his last win, he went 33 seconds and scored 133 DraftKings points. If Derek Lewis gets the first round win, he's almost certainly going to land on the winning lineup. He's got about a 33% chance of doing it, plus 200. You do 3 lineups, you should have one of them with Derek Lewis. Not more, not less. If you do 150 lineups, you should have 50 with Derek Lewis. Not more, not less. Nascimento, I think I'll be potentially under the field. I mean, he's got about a 20% chance of getting the first round finish, first round win. So yeah, like, I don't know. Yeah, about 20% seems right. I'm not going to have 52% Derek Lewis. I will probably aim to have exactly 1/3 Derek Lewis. But I think the field will probably be even closer to my 33% mark, and the 33% mark that you also identified, than the 52% mark we've got there in the projected ownership. But I think he'll probably be a little bit over the 33%, so I think I'll be under the field on Derek.
Let's talk about the other dynamic on the slate. We have the biggest favorite, Mateus Rebecki, minus 400 over Diego Ferreira, who is getting up there in age, but it's not the worst guy, right? Rebecki on this slate, like Rebecki has like the clearest like wrestling upside, right? 94, like I don't mind paying up for like grapplers because in a 3-round decision they could still score 100 plus 120 points. Who knows? If they get a finish at the end of like the second round, they could score 120 points. A lot more paths to a lot of points, but he also is the highest priced fighter on the card at 9,400. With the amount of live underdogs, and especially live underdogs that can actually put up 100 points. I know most of these shows we talk about, the highest priced fighter, yeah, he's most likely to win. He has an inside the distance over 50%, but he has to beat out so many other people in order to make the optimal lineup. I mean, I look at Alberg, Giussette, Woodson, like underneath. I just look at this and go, this is a slate that 4 or 5 underdogs could win, and like 2 or 3 of them could win and put up 110 points. I'm much more interested in playing a guy like Rebecki on this slate. I'm not sure what our sim tool is going to say in comparison to someone like Alberg, who may have a little bit more, or Despania at 9,000. We'll talk about that fight. We have him at 40% owned. I'm not sure if he's going to, I think that's about right. I think he's come somewhere between 35 and 45, depending on how people are building their lineups. But just looking at the rest of the card of like, okay, how many people on this card could score 100 points with a 3-round decision? Like, I mean, like, Rebecki may literally be the only one. So that just makes me, if I'm spending up on salary, I mean, I've built Rebecki lineups where, like, I look at the underdogs that I'm playing, and I'm fine with it. And I'm like, okay. And I built Rebecki lineups that still leave like 600 on the table, and I'm still fine with it.
Yeah.
Do you feel this the same way? Because typically you tend to be under on like the most expensive fighter, because in large field contests, it's a little bit less likely to become optimal because they have to score so many points in order to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, and Michel Pereira is the example last week, right, where he got the quick win bonus. He got the quick win bonus. There was a $7,200 fighter that won. What more could you ask in terms of like picking the high priced fighter to get him on the winning lineup? And it still didn't get there. And you said the couple of things that happened. One, like Pantoja went berserk and scored 143 points at a cheaper price. So that leapfrogged Pereira. Anthony Smith was the only underdog that won, or at least only kind of low priced underdog that won. And then you had some other fighters in the 9,000s that like put up like pretty good scores. So that you just got priced off the lineup. But I think it's important to always think about the most expensive fighter as the guy most likely to get priced off the winning lineup. But this might have to be an exception. And I've got like Rebecki tagged, I think, already. But so he's $200 cheaper than Pereira was last week. And I think the 7,900 or so range, 7,900 to like 7,000 range, you get a lot more win equity than you normally get on a card like this. So you're getting a discount off of Pereira last week for like pretty similar win odds. And it looks one of those things where I think Pereira is like minus 650. And I think Rebecki is like minus 500. And that seems like it should be a big difference. And it's not. It's like difference between like 82% and like 79%. So you're getting about the same win equity at $200 cheaper on a card where like you've got a bunch of guys in the $7,000 range and ladies that have like a 45% win equity and usually like win probability, and usually that number in that range is like 38% or like 36%. Well, now you got like 45% chance of winning the fight. So that like increases your chances of like taking Rebecca, taking like one more underdog, and still having like pretty good like win product if you calculate that kind of thing.
The last thing that I mentioned in the beginning, as my screen goes off for a second, that there are clear fights to target and clear fights not to target. I mean, you could look at the ITD lines and see why. Like, there are fights where, this fight is favored. Like the under 1.5 has juice on it, and there are some fights where fight to goes the distance is like minus 300. Let's first talk about the fights not to target, because I think that we could do that quickly. Sean Woodson, Alex Caceres. I mean, Sean Woodson's 9,100. He's plus 375 inside the distance. His style is essentially he's essentially a boxer, and not necessarily even like a high volume boxer. He's just stick and move, win the fight via decision. Alex Caceres isn't like a chump, but he's not like high volume. And will he be able to get Sean Woodson down? Probably not. I mean, it's not like Alex Caceres is a great wrestler even. I mean, I prefer all these fights not to target. The consideration you need to have is, okay, the underdog has a lot more win equity, but if they win, they may only score like 65, 70 points. And then on the favorites, they're like overpriced for the perceived ceiling, but the ownership's going to be very low. Like Sean Woodson may come in at 10% owned. And then we also have like Jake Hadley versus Charles Johnson. Jake Hadley's plus 300, Charles Johnson plus 480. Like that fight most likely is just, it's a boxing match for 3 rounds in a split decision, right? Like very clearly. And then you have the 2 women's fights in the mid-range. The saving grace of this is that, well, they're also mid-range fighters, so like a 90-point score like isn't that bad. 85 points, that could still be useful. But I mean, they're both like Ricci's plus 400, Hardy's plus 400, Aldris plus 700, plus 600 for Pennington. Like they have the lowest ITD odds on the entire slate. Like Diego Ferreira has a higher ITD against Rebecca, and he's 6,800. The only thing that I like about women like Ricci and Hardy, especially in a card with not as much like other wrestlers, is that, I mean, Tabula Ricci, Baby Shark could go out and land 6 takedowns and win a decision and score 100 points for 8,300. So I lean a little bit more towards her. But outside, like, these are are there any saving graces that you see for these fights that are like, even like maybe even the Waters Goff fight? Not that I wouldn't consider that the fight not to target. I'm not saying it's the greatest of fights. I mean, are you going to be over on these fights just simply because just people could clearly see that these are fights that are most likely to go to decision? I mean, if Sean Woodson just manages to get a first, I mean, plus 850 is his first round, not his first round finishing prop. Are you just the type of, if he has an 11% chance of winning the first round at 9,100, I'm going to want to have about 11% of it.
Yeah. So I might be over the field on some of these fights. It's interesting. The first one you went to is Sean Woodson and Alex Caceres, and I've already written that up as the fight I'm like most likely to avoid. And so yeah, I guess Wild, when you went to that one first, we should note, the card is in St. Louis, and there's 3 St. Louis fighters on the card. So Sean Woodson is one of them. Joaquin Buckley is another, and Charles Johnson, you also mentioned is the third. I might start actually in my general UFC play, like for my multi-entry build, I might start targeting floor a lot more than I have. And part of it is actually this card just got me thinking, because we do have some fighters that don't seem to have that high of a ceiling. Like only 3% of lineups have a chance of getting 6 out of 6 wins. And I was like, man, like, the GPPs pay out 20% of of entrant, the top 20% of entrants. And if only like 3% of lineups are getting 6 wins, we should all maybe be targeting floor a little bit more than we are, right? Knowing that just like you want to get like a bunch of min cashes. And this is if you're doing 150 lineups, or maybe even if you're doing 20 lineups, like I should maybe be targeting floor a little bit more than I am already. With the thought process that if you're targeting floor, like sometimes you are going to get that guy like Sean Woodson that gets that 10% chance of getting the first round win. And it's I think the saving grace on this card for these fighters is that you just mentioned a lot of fights that don't have perceived upside. Like one of them is probably going to have a pretty good score, and so maybe that's the fight you want to have. And then if you take away all of these fights, you're left with just a handful of other fights, and those fights could bust. I can see paths for all of the other fights where actually you don't end up with that high of a score. As you may have with a fighter that has like a 50% chance of getting the first round win. Like if it goes the other way, you're going to have some lower owned fighters that look relatively better.
Well, let's talk about those fights. The first one is, the clearest of clear, because of one of the participants in it, and that is Esteban Ribovics. They're right next to each other. We can talk about both of them, but Esteban Ribovics 8,900 versus Terrence McKinney at 7,300. Terrence McKinney is plus 180 inside the distance, plus 275 in the first round, and he's only 7,300. We know with Terrence McKinney fights that Terrence McKinney is going to come out in the first round and go just ape shit, and he can wrestle also, right? And Ribovics has some submissions, so there could be some groundwork in the first round, and then if McKinney doesn't get that finish in the first round, he essentially dies in the second round. That's a typical Terrence McKinney fight. So either he scores 120 points, or he scores 7 points and gets knocked out. Ribovics is the favorite here, but he's only a minus 160 favorite at 8,900, but he's minus 150 inside the distance. We have him at 31% and McKinney we have them both at around 31. I think Ribovics comes in a little under that. I think Ribovics ends up, maybe in the 25% range, and McKinney comes in like the 38% range. We've seen slates where we project McKinney to be like 34% owned, and he comes in at like 48% owned, because it's just so clear that if his win condition is him being optimal. It is like that 27%, like it's almost impossible for a $7,300 fighter that wins in the first round to like not end up being optimal in some, like he needs 5 other underdogs to outscore him in order for that not to happen. Are you more likely to just eat the McKinney chalk on the slate? Because it's just so clear. Because Ribovics at 8,900 could win in the first round, not a quick win bonus, and still not make the optimal at 8,900. A little bit more likely compared to a $9,400 fighter. But just the dynamics of, if all things being equal, like Terrence McKinney still, based on the win probability of the money line, it's like a 42% chance of winning. His win condition is pretty much scoring a lot of points. You said you wanted to avoid some of these fights that they may bust or whatever, but it's kind of hard to avoid this fight.
Yeah, I might end up under the field. And so McKinney's got about a 40% chance to win and a 25% chance of winning in the first round. That's a little bit wide to me. I don't what is the condition where Terrence McKinney wins outside the first round? I don't think it's ever happened. Not in his UFC career. And he's got some big wins with high scores, but those almost always come as at least recently, his last three wins that each scored over 100 points. He was a massive favorite. And when he's been an underdog, it hasn't gone well for him. And if the fight gets out of the first round, it doesn't go well for him. And that's just kind of at this point, that's just who he is. And I think he's got like 8 or so UFC fights. And I don't think that's changing. He's the kind of fighter I'm trying to get away from, where like I should, we're maybe like chasing upside too much, I think, because like everybody else is chasing upside too. And he is like, yeah, McKinney gets owned more than he's projected to be owned because everyone's like chasing that upside. But those like zeros can just kill you. If he gets like finished in the first round, it can just kill you. So but the issue is if McKinney does get a win outside of the first round, he's only 7,300. So like that should do well. It's just so hard to picture how that happens. And so I feel like it's more of just a weird math thing with the odds. Like McKinney should either be a bigger favorite in the first round or have less, win, or his win odds should be less.
His win odds should be closer to his round 1 odds. That's essentially what you're saying. But our sim tool, you have to admit that when the sims come out, I mean, plus 275 inside the distance for plus 275 in the first round for a $7,300 fighter. I mean, I'm assuming that our sim tool is going to have him optimal like 30+% of the, like he's going to show up towards the top just simply because on all of those outcomes, like he's going to make the optimal lineup.
Yeah, it is. It's true. And like the numbers are going to love him. I think he'll be high owned. I don't know though, because I think he'll be highly owned, but there are some other fighters that are maybe just a little bit less flashy that like have like better odds than you would maybe think. Like Nursultan Ruzabayev
against Buckley.
Yeah, like I mean he's got like a better than 20% chance of getting the first round win. And his win odds are better. And he's a little bit pricier. He's 200 more. I don't know. I think I'd rather go there because I don't think Ruzabayev is going to get that zero. It's like Buckley's chances of winning in the first round aren't that high. I mean, there's 25%, but like for a favored fighter, that's not as high. I mean, it's basically the same percent as like McKinney and Ruzabayev. So I think I'd probably rather go to Ruzabayev, but like we'll see. I'm probably like reverse mushing Terrence McKinney into 150 points in the second round.
How about this other heavyweight fight? We got Robelis Despania, 9,000 against Waldo Cortez Acosta at 7,200. Despania has the best inside the distance line on the entire slate at -180, -120 in the first round. Now remember, Robelis Despania is 6'7". Like this guy is just like it's like a video game character, just stepped into the octagon. He's never been out of the first he's never been out of the first round. I mean, like this is purely like this guy is either going to knock Waldo Cortez Acosta's head off, and after the first round, if it makes it there, shrug emoji. Who knows what this is? Cortez Acosta, I don't view as like a great fighter, but he's gone 3 rounds with some other heavyweights. Like, I don't think there's going to be much wrestling. Like, Despania could obviously be exploited on the mat, but Cortez Acosta ain't the one to do it. I mean, really, they're both very similar fighters, other than Despania is just tall and punches harder. But outside that first round, I mean, Cortez Acosta is plus 215 inside the distance. If Despania may actually end up being the highest owned fighter on the entire slate because he's 9,000 with such high ITD lines. But like compared to Rebecca, like I look at the $400 difference and I go, like Despania could get a quick win bonus, and Rebecca has ways to score more than him in a decision. So like that always makes me look at this and go, maybe I let the field play more Despania than I will. But then, of course, I'm going to look at the Sims tool tomorrow. And when he's a 55% chance of winning in the first round, it's very hard for our Sims not to, like, he he may be optimal less than his ownership, but I still expect him to be like one of the top 3 of the entire slate to be in the optimal lineup, or probably over Rebecki only because he's cheaper, or Ulberg because he's cheaper.
Yeah, I don't know, it's a Murphy's Law fight because it's a binary thing, and like whichever decision I make is going to be wrong. So Despania, like UFC always does this, right? They get like kind of a character, right? Somebody that's like pretty notable, and so Despania is an Olympic medalist in Taekwondo, I think,
Right.
and so like he has like a previous like career as like a Taekwondo fighter. He's a little bit older for like making his debut, I think, earlier this year against Mick Parkin. And they always like set these guys up that are like notable because he's like 6'7" and can like do these incredible high kicks. And like they set them up with like a total patsy for their first fight, right? Like, and so like Despania in his first fight, I don't know, it was like minus 500 or like he was like expected to get the quick win. And he did, right? And he got it, very quickly. Put up a massive score. Yeah, it was a minus 370 favorite. Put up 127 DraftKings points. But now he's not fighting Mick Parkin. He's fighting like a fighter that's a little bit better, right? Because then they start increasing the competition. And Waldo Cortez Acosta has never been knocked out in his UFC career. Yeah, I think he has in his boxing career. So I don't know if this is going to be as easy of a fight. And it like if you look at the Vegas odds, and I hate to go against the Vegas odds. Like, yeah, the Vegas odds says Despania has a 50-50 shot of getting the first round win. I don't know. I would not make that bet. And I'll feel like an idiot if he goes out there just high kicks while Cortez Acosta goes down for his first time in his UFC career with a first round knockout, and and Despania puts up 130 something points. Because at 9,000, that's going to put him on the winning lineup. Like I don't like the bet of him getting the first round finish. It is. I mean, it's possible that the Taekwondo just doesn't translate against higher quality UFC fighters. And I don't think people are going to bet that way. I think people want a fun Saturday night bet. It's like this guy is 6'7", an Olympic medalist in Taekwondo, and he can kick like another 6'5" guy in the head. I'm going to bet that that's going to happen. I don't like, and the line movement is going in favor of Despania. I don't know. It's
but
possible
he's not that huge of a favorite. He's minus 230. I mean,
yeah.
that's a over a 2-1 favorite. Yeah, but like you mentioned, his last fight, it's like he's not a 5-1 favorite. He's not a 6-1 favorite. Like Cortez Acosta is. I don't think he's a schlub. I don't think he's good, but I just don't think he's a schlub. And my retort to like the first round, you're focusing so much on that first round win, but if Despania wins in the second round, I mean, he could still score 100 points. I mean, like at 9,000, it's a little bit less than like if he was 9,500. Like I'm much more concerned about Carlos Ulberg scoring against Alonzo Menefield, which is another fight that is kind of binary. Also, like these are both just like one guy's going to punch out the other guy, or the fight's going to bust as a whole type of matchups. But like Carlos Ulberg, we've seen go in 3 rounds. Like Alonzo Menefield, like doesn't have great cardio, but we've seen him go 3 rounds. Robelis Despania, no matter what he looks like, he could look like an action figure all you want. If he goes and he sees that first round win and he doesn't get it, it's quite possible he's huffing and puffing, and in the second round, like and I'm not even saying that Waldo Cortez Acosta even knocks him out. It's just that maybe WCA just volume strikes for the next 2 rounds and wins a decision. Like we haven't seen this Robelis go any. Like we don't. And I'm saying that not assuming that he's gonna like have cardio problems. Who knows? Maybe he goes for 15 minutes and lands 4 knockdowns in the process. Like maybe he's fine, right? Like, but we just don't know. And I think the field is going to be way too sure of themselves.
Yes.
On this fight. But boy, if I was playing 3 lineups, I would feel really, really sick not at least having one lineup with this guy.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, my hot take on the expert survey is that Waldo Cortez Acosta wins the fight and does not land on the winning lineup. Because we haven't seen Despania go a minute in the UFC yet. And I think he like fell down on his first kick that he tried against McParkin. But McParkin couldn't take advantage. Maybe Waldo Cortez Acosta can. And I think I don't know. He's such a fun fighter to put into your lineup, right? He's a 6'7" guy with the 50% chance of getting the first round win. I think people could, I think he could get outsized ownership. That's unreasonable for his Vegas odds. And I'm just not sure I buy into the Vegas odds. So yeah, it's going to be a tough fight to fade. I think there's a chance that fight busts and then you're knocking out half the field. If the entire fight just busts. So potentially even more than half the field. I think a lot of people are going to go to Spania, and then I think a lot of people are going to go to Cortez Acosta saying I'm getting leverage. Maybe what the leverage you want is just not playing this fight. But yeah, it's going to be a nervous 60 seconds and then nervous next 4 minutes. And it's possible Despania, can go into the second round and put up some volume. We just haven't seen it. Terrence McKinney, we've seen him go into the second round. It just doesn't look good. Right. Spania, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. We haven't seen it. And I think the field's going to be way more confident than they should be.
Lastly, before we get out of here, I think the most interesting fight on the card, and it may end up being the most important fight on the card, is in the mid range. It's an $8,500, $7,700 fight. It's Slava Borshev versus Chase Hooper. This fight is most likely doesn't go the distance. Borshev is -110 inside the distance. Hooper is +215. The win odds are very close, -135 for Borshev and 115 for Hooper. It's a Chase Hooper fight. Chase Hooper is someone that could put up, legitimately put up 140 points, or legitimately look like when you turn on the fight and within 3 minutes wonder why you have any of him, right? Because on his feet, first off, he looks like he's 12, right? Just simply, obviously he's young, but he looks like he's 12 or 13 years old, right? Just a tall. It's who let the 8th grader into the octagon? But the thing is that his submission grappling is, one of the best in the UFC. The issue is that his wrestling. Look at his stature. It's he just looks like an overgrown 13-year-old. It's not oh, this guy could really take people down. No, he really can't. He does a lot of heel hook. He tries, as long as he can close the distance. Chase Hooper is going to be extremely dangerous. He could get a standing guillotine. He could get on your back while you're standing. He could win this fight via submission without a takedown. Without getting credited with a takedown on a guard pull, stuff like that. And then Borshev, Slava Claus. If Chase Hooper can't do that, Chase Hooper's face is gonna show it, and Borshev probably scores a ton of points in the process. With 40 unblocked strikes and a TKO stoppage by the referee, because they, it's oh, we can't let this 8th grader take that much damage. I'm assuming that in our sim tool, what the odds are, both of these guys are going to show up at combined pretty high up on the list.
I don't know. I don't know if the Sims, if it does. So this is one of my favorite fights to target, potentially my favorite fight to target. I don't know if the Sims tool will recognize it because I think it is a style thing. But I think the winner of this fight is going to put up a high score on a card where we may not get a ton of high scores. And even better, the high score may not come if it's on Chase Hooper's side. It may not come in a first round finish. First round win. It may be 3 rounds of repeated takedowns. Just side notes. I think like you did as well. Like I started playing UFC DFS during COVID 4 years ago. And it was like 4 years ago, Chase Hooper faced like Alex Caceres, and he was one of the highest favorites on the card. And I remember like I didn't know what any of the fighters looked like. So I took Chase Hooper. I'm like, oh, this guy is like, one of the biggest favorites. I was expecting some kind of like massive like animal, and like Chase Hooper, and it was 4 years ago. So Chase Hooper was like even 4 years younger. I think he's like 20, he was like 20, 21. And he comes out, I'm like, that's the guy that I, put all of these entry fees behind. Like, yeah, he looks like he's 12. I mean, he looks like he's 12 now. Like 4 years ago, he looked like he was 8, So yeah, that was my first like Chase Hooper experience. I don't know, like if Borshev wins the fight, I don't know if it'll necessarily be like repeated striking. I can see this happening. Like one of two things is going to happen. Like Chase Hooper is going to go for a takedown. Like Slava Claus is going to either catch him with a punch when he goes for a takedown and lay Chase Hooper out, and that'll be it. And Borshev will have like a high score, or Chase Hooper gets the takedown, and then like Slava Claus is not going to be able to like either not going to be able to get up or not going to be able to stay up. And Chase Hooper is going to get the submission. But I think either of them could have put up a very high score, and I don't think the numbers, like the odds, aren't necessarily going to be something that you like look at and say like, oh, this is going to be like a really high scoring fight. But I do think the mix of styles of like primarily like a striker against and it's a striker that has like bad takedown defense against a grappler who doesn't necessarily have a chin. Like that's great. Like that's the best matchup you could find. Because like, yeah, either Hooper is going to be racking up takedowns or he's going to potentially go down in the first round. And so, yeah, I like either side of this fight. I think it's like one of the best fights for tournaments that you can target.
So you seem to be in agreement with me that, like, I think this ends up being the most important. Whoever wins this, like this is the fight that you have to pay attention to the most, because it's in this range where, like, Chase Hooper isn't cheap enough where, 75-point win is going to matter, and Borshev isn't expensive enough where, like, if he got 96 points, that you may not mind that. That may be good. He may be optimal at 8,500. So you kind of have to pay attention to this. See, when you pick like, if you take someone like Menefield at 6,900, it's like, what you're getting into. It's like,
Yeah.
like either he wins either he wins with a knockout, or you move on with your life. Like you're not aiming for, like, is Menefield going to win a 58-point decision? Like, that's not going to matter either. Like you kind of know what you're going for. This Borshev, these mid-range fights. I mean, even like Tabitha Ricci against Tisha Torres Pennington. I mean, Tisha's coming off a two-year layoff. She had a baby. I mean, Tabitha Ricci is also. I look at the same thing as like a Chase Hooper, that if Tisha Pennington is not ready, like Ricci could just have 3 rounds of grappling, get a late second round finish, and put up 120 points. Like if I'm going to side with any of these fighters, I go back to the Robbie Ray rule. I always come back to Cheese's Robbie Ray rule. I like targeting high variance fights, and I like targeting high variance fights where the ownership doesn't account for the variance. Either they're too scared of the variance, or they're too overconfident with that it's Despania is going to just knock him out. Like, that's like, no, this is a high variance fight. You're treating as if Despania is like a minus 800 favorite when he's not. Like,
Yeah.
I lean away from those types of things. And then if people are going to be like, yeah, why am I going to play Tabitha Ricci when I can play Derek Lewis or Slava Claus? Or why am I going to play like Billy Goff when I can play McKinney or Ruzaboev? Like, I just look at those situations and go, yeah, well, the ownership shouldn't be half of these guys. Like people are way more confident. Like I'm not sure how. Like, we have Hooper at 23% owned. If you tell me he's 23% owned, I'm going to have a lot more. Like I almost get the sense that I feel in my bones that Hooper's going to be more owned than Borshev. Yet our ownership shows it the opposite. But if our ownership is right, I want to have a lot more Chase Hooper.
Yeah, exactly. I like these fights in the mid range. I don't mind them. Like, Veronica Hardy has really good win odds, or pretty good win odds for like an 8,200 price tag. Like the line has moved in her favor. And I just having watched a few JJ Aldrich fights, like I don't know, I like the Veronica Hardy side to win. I don't know that she's necessarily going to put up a low score. Like Tabitha Ricci and Tisha Pennington is a good example of what I'm talking about, where I think people are going to look at that fight and go, it's going to be a low score. Like the winner's going to put up 80, but like I don't know, the loser might put up 40. And I have no idea who's going to win, right? But like maybe I want to be over the field on that 80 and 40 rather than like the Derek Lewis 100 and Nascimento 0, right? Like maybe I want to be targeting those fights a lot more because that 40 is a lot more useful than the 0. And I know that like it's tournaments and we want to think about, we want to go think about getting first place. But like there are some times when like the winner of the Ricci Pennington fight puts up 120 for whatever reason, right? Somebody slips on a banana peel, we don't know. And I'd rather be over the field when that happens. And then also when it doesn't happen, I'm getting an 80 from the winner, but I'm getting a 40 from the loser, right? And that is like if only 3% of lineups are getting 6 winners, like I don't know, that 40 can be awfully useful. So like I do think that's a good example of like the kind of fight I'm going to start trying to be over the field on at the expense of some of these like an Allberg like Manyfield or like a fight, or Despaigne, Waldo Cortez Acosta, where like the winner could put up 120, the loser is going to put up a 0. Whereas like a fight where the winner's putting up 70 and the loser's putting up 60, like maybe I want to have a lot more of that fight.
That's more of a portfolio like risk management type of thing.
That's
like more for 150 maxers than anything else. Or small field. Like if you're playing the 555, there's a lot more value in 85-point wins than there is in large field, with the payout structure being so dramatic. Then in the 555, it's like maybe you don't win with the 85-point score, but you come in 6th, right? You have 6 out of 6 fights and you end up coming in 6th. Like that 40-point score. I mean, I think last week, like if you, or the week before, there's some female fighter that was really low owned that put up like 53 points in a loss. And then like 10 fights into the card, it's like, well, she's the highest scoring underdog. Like even though 2 other underdogs won, but they won with like 68 points and 72 points. And it's like, dude, that like I'm playing like 100 entries. It's like I cashed like all of those entries just simply with the highest scoring underdog, because obviously she was low owned, which means I had all the other good fighters. It was like 5 wins and the 1 loss. It's like, well, obviously I didn't win first place, but all those entries 3x their money. And sometimes you need to going minus 90%. Like if you're playing like a lot of lineups, like every slate, is not a recipe for sustainability. That sometimes that you're going to lower the amount of entries and shots you have at first just to stabilize your portfolio. And the side benefit is you tend to be over on the unexpected fights that if they happen to hit, you actually have more first place equity. Like imagine Sean Woodson being only 8% owned and then going out and he doesn't even land a knockout, right? Alex Caceres twists his ankle and he gets a finish in the first, and Sean Woodson gets credited with a first round finish. And you're sitting there with like 16% of him when the field is 8%. And you only played him because it's like, if he gives me 70, 80 points, I'm not going minus 90% on this slate. Like you kind of have to, like that's kind of the balance. I think my attitude though, John, is that if you're playing less amount of lineups, people play it the reverse. They go, well, I only have 3 lineups. I can't play crazy like you. It's like, no, it's actually the opposite. Because you're playing less money, feel free to play 3 crazy entries. But if you're playing 150, playing 150 crazy entries is just a recipe for you to lose $3,000 like every slate until you win solo first for 100,000 But boy, your graph is going to be like this. So that's kind of what you're talking about. But if you're playing 3 entries into the large field contest, I'd say feel free to just play the 3 craziest entries that you think are viable.
Yeah.
Because what's the big deal? You only have 3 entries. Like, don't feel like, and obviously, if you're playing 3 entries and you're so concerned about, well, $45, imagine if I lose $45, like, you probably shouldn't be playing DFS at that point, right? You should only be playing with what you can afford to lose, right? So I think that's kind of the key of what you're saying of like, if you're MMing with these large portfolios, that making all 150 lineups with this like high first place win equity, like over the course of 5 years is obviously profitable, but your swings are going to be so humongous that maybe the better path is to target some of the floor fights. And then the byproduct is that you're always over on some unexpected situation anyway.
Exactly. Yes. And I would feel differently about this, like if our lineups were only like 5 fighters or 4 fighters, right? Well, then it's like, well, you don't have that extra, like, if you think about each like fight being about a 50-50 shot, of getting the win, because like that's the way the salary structure is set up. And this would also be different if we have like a favorite that's like, because of a late replacement or whatever, that the favorite is really underpriced, where we saw with like Jan Top a few weeks ago, and then he went out and lost anyway. But if you could have, if you had like unlimited salary, right? Like, yeah, no, you just want like the 5 favorites, and you want the 5 or 6 favorites that have like the best chance of getting the first round finish. Flip side of that first round finish, though, it's like everything is priced according to like the win odds. You're putting in some fighters that have like a very low chance of getting the win, or going to get like a 0. Like if that fighter with the 50% chance of getting the first round win, when he doesn't, like, and his opponent gets the first round win, like he might be putting up a 0. I think these like high losing scores on contests to pay out 20% of the field and only get like 3% get 6 out of 6 wins. Like, yeah, maybe you want to be really considering floor a lot more if you're like developing like a portfolio of like 20 lineups or 150 lineups.
Well, if you want more of the breakdown of the fights, the Grounded Pound podcast has been posted for premium members, so you can listen to Mike and Liam's breakdown of all the fights. John, you're going to be on Crunch Time tomorrow?
Yep. Crunch Time tomorrow, I think 3 o'clock. I think the card starts at 4. So yeah, I think we'll be on at 3. And yeah, should be a fun one to break down.
Hit that thumbs up button on your way out the door, right? There's free content here, so hit that thumbs up button, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you're new here. Hit the notification bell to always know when we go live. We got Grinders Live later today for MLB, followed by Crunch Time. It's a pretty decent slate. We got, obviously, our prop stuff, our pick'em stuff, all of our premium tools, content, sim labs, everything. Go click them that link in the description. Get that deal on a combo premium package. Show up in our Discord, rotogrinders.com/Discord. Have a good weekend. Have a good slate. I'll see you next week because I'm always here Monday through Friday, 11 o'clock Eastern, talking about all things you're thinking about in daily fantasy, props, and pick'em on RotoGrinders Today.